This week on The Futurist, the shock of DeepSeek.
The more and more we are seeing models like DeepSeek and so forth perform these cognition tests and sort of blow the results out of the water and so forth, brings us closer to a point where it's going to be so easy to integrate AI into systems, and yet we still really don't have ethical frameworks for the safe operation of these AIs.
Hey, welcome back to The Futurist, everybody. I'm Rob Tersick, and joining me again, my friend and colleague, Brett King. Hi, friend. How you doing?
It's good, man. No, I like these things where you and I just chat. We get into some really interesting conversations, always good shows. And, it gives us, when we're doing interviews with people, the art is to sort of try and bring their content out to the fore. But when it's you and I, and we can just talk about the stuff, like we love to do. So
two opinionated blowhards. It's like drive time radio.
Yes.
Hey, I've got great news for you. So here's the great news. Last time we spoke, we were. Thank you. That was the news. Yes. So we got some rain. We got an inch of rain in Los Angeles, which is not a lot, but it's enough to slow down the fires. Interestingly, it doesn't put them out. We would need about 4 inches of rain to do that. And it slows down the fire. It's not spreading. So hurrah, after a couple weeks of terror, everybody can sleep peacefully here and relax. And our fire department is still hard at work.
I will say I'm very glad to hear that things in SoCal are getting a little bit more under control. I do, I want to talk about the wildfires thing and obviously watch that. I'm sure there's going to be more opportunities for that. One of the things I really would love to sort of delve into a little bit on a future show is the carbon footprint of the agricultural industry. Because I've been researching and, you want to stop the climate crisis, you cannot avoid looking at agriculture, particularly meat production. So we should get into that.
Methane releases by cattle, right? It's not something we think about. Cow farts heating up the environment.
But of course, the big cow. Well, I learned that cows produce, or if in the United States today, 138,000 pounds of cow excrement are produced every second. Anyway, how's that for a stat?
I have sympathy for the person who's listening to us right now. They're wondering, how are these guys going to link to
All
this?
Right, let's get into DeepSeek. Yes, right, we went off on a tangent as we do, but we've been talking about China on this show for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's been interesting to see DeepSeek R1 come out of China just 11 days ago. When we're recording this now, DeepSeek was thrust onto the market on January 20th. Yeah. And a few days later, within a few days, we saw almost $1 trillion written off in US technology stocks. We're going to talk about what was the cause of that.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I've really observed, and you and I've seen it on our common Facebook pages and so forth, is there are American tech pros right now trying to tie themselves in knots to explain why a more efficient LLM model and weighting system isn't really Chinese excellence. It's just they copied everything from the US, right? And it's like, but if they copied it from the US, how is it more efficient? I don't understand that. Like if they stole OpenAI's code, then why isn't OpenAI as efficient like this? But that's a different subject.
It's a very, very good point. Also, there's an element of irony here for OpenAI to be complaining that DeepSeek distilled its model. You go, okay, we're talking about a company that's responsible for the greatest theft of intellectual property in world history, and now they're complaining that someone ripped off their model.
Stole their intellectual property. Yeah.
I've got the world's tiniest violin here for OpenAI. Seriously. Now, the funny part here is
this is a game you're playing, right? Yeah.
The panic level here has been extraordinary. And I honestly, Brett, I'm trying to figure it out because, okay, there was a big stock sell-off. It hit the tech stocks particularly hard. Nvidia famously was the single greatest one-day sell-off of stock on January 27th, a week after that announcement was made. And it hasn't quite recovered. It's now at about 10% below where it was. So that's a serious hit. to Nvidia in particular, and broadly tech stocks have gone down. But what I'm trying to puzzle out here is the panic. The panic is much greater than a gyration in the stock market. People are freaking out about this here, as if it's the end of something. And I'm scratching my head, Brett, because I'm thinking, wait, a cheaper, more efficient open source AI model is a good thing. I mean, how can you be against that? That is definitely a good thing for people that like innovation. I mean, unless you're like a cheerleader for open AI and a fully closed model controlled by a small company that seeks to be a monopolist and dominate the category, why would you not be interested and supportive of an open source improvement? And actually, that's the position that Jan LeCun at Facebook has articulated. And that's important to note because much of what DeepSeek built was built on Meta's Llama open source AI model. So in many respects, the folks in China are building on the resources and the investments that were made by Facebook famously a couple of years ago. That was Facebook's approach. They were going to go the opposite way. They were going to go open source. They were playing kind of a spoiler role. And now we're seeing the fruit of that happening. Personally, I think it's great for everybody who's not OpenAI.
Look, one of the really interesting elements of this is, we have expected to see this type of scaling. We have expected to see these types of improvements in the models. I guess the disappointment for the US tech industry is with the hundreds of billions of dollars going into this that, and we don't really know how much China spent on this. They say $5 million, but that seems dubious given, the huge compute power they brought to this. But if you look at really the big win out of this is if we can have this type of scaling and compression of reasoning in particular, then we are getting much more useful AI models, much lighter AI models, and it's going to be more impactful. There's going to be so much more we can do with it.
And just to link this back to your comments about the carbon footprint of methane releasing cattle, here, try this for a segue. There has been a growing concern for some time when we talk about the ethics of artificial intelligence. One of the concerns people raise is the immense cost, the immense environmental cost of these gigantic data centers that are required to train these models. So in some respects, we can say, gosh, a model that can be trained at 1/20th of the energy footprint and cost, that's definitely a good thing for the environment. That's definitely an improvement. I mean, look,
absolutely,
it's not news that we haven't been very efficient. The last 3 years has been a story of AI companies throwing massive amounts of hardware at this problem. And lots of people have pointed out that that's not an efficient approach. And it's also not likely to gain efficiency over time. It's going to be less and less effective each time they scale up. But the message has been scale, and it's been an arms race, really since 2022. There's been an arms race where billions of dollars have been thrown at the problem, specifically billions of dollars of Nvidia chips have been thrown at the problem. And what those companies haven't done in their race to the top, or their race to supremacy, I guess, they haven't stopped to make their models more efficient. They've been leaving a lot of low-hanging fruit in their wake, where other companies that work in a more stately pace following can make some great gains in efficiency. And that's what we're seeing. These Chinese researchers have to be more efficient because of U.S. export controls. They can't get their hands on the H100 chips, the very advanced semiconductors from Nvidia. And so they're working with the H800, which are legal to export.
GPUs,
those are available to use. And they have to squeeze more efficiency out of those chips. But they're doing it at less cost. They're doing it with a lower carbon footprint. I think this is, on the whole, a great thing. And folks, it's open source. It's fully documented. They release it, reports. They tell you exactly how they went about doing it. So
you can,
in the spirit of science,
you can load it up on your home computer right now.
Everyone's doing it.
But I think you asked the question, why is there been such a visceral reaction? I have a theory. I think it's cognitive bias. I think the tech industry in Silicon Valley thinks it's the best in the world, leading all of this. And suddenly to have such a visceral example of Chinese leadership in this, I've seen everyone from Elon and Chamath and all of these guys really, they've got these H100 chips. They smuggled them in somehow. Don't let them, tell you they haven't, and it wasn't $5 million. And it's like, why are you trying? If there was a US company that had produced this, the reaction would be completely different, in my view.
Euphoria, and nationalistic fervor. But now instead, we got this anti-China bias. I think you're right. So behind all of this is investor. There's a growing sense of unease among investors. They've been asked to pony up the billions of dollars that these AI startups have required. And they've been sold this narrative about ever increasing scale that will somehow magically get us to general intelligence, although there's no evidence to support that conclusion. That's just the idea that the more you scale it up, the smarter the model will get, and then somehow in general intelligence will just emerge magically. There's lots of folks led by Gary Marcus, the critic, who have been saying that it will never work. But even
I'm not
Bill
a big
Gates,
fan of Gary. I think he's a sensationalist looking to be the counter culture guy when it comes to the AI stuff. He makes a valid
point in this case.
He does. But I think I actually have been thinking a lot about this AGI thing. And this is why the DeepSeek reasoning engine capability, where this is really part of the big payoff that DeepSeek saw compared with OpenAI and Anthropic and the other players, is that they were able to show compressed reasoning capabilities because they use different types of reward systems for the backward propagation and the weighting system. So they rewarded accurate answers, but they rewarded accurate reasoning processes. That's not how we train LLMs for OpenAI these days. So that's why it takes a lot more data and there's a lot bigger hardware footprints because of the training approach that we're using.
That's right.
But that's go ahead.
There's a lot of speculation about which techniques they've used. Some of the speculation turned out to be incorrect. Some of the techniques they used for more efficiency are surprisingly simple, but that suggests to me that there's a lot more room to improve the efficiency of these models and still get good results. One thing I'm not clear about, but I'm interested in learning about, is the impact on inference, because all this discussion has been about the cost of training the model. When you say it costs $5.5 million to train it, that's to set the model up in the first place. But then to run it, to apply it, that's inference. And there's an ongoing cost. Now, when we start to deploy AI at scale across many industries, inferencing is going to be the big expense, not the training. Training is kind of a one-time expense. It's not clear to me what the impact there is. We'll learn more. I'm sure that's a space that everyone's considering right now. What's interesting about this, though, is it suggests to me that you'll be able to run inferencing on those H800 chips that are cheaper and more widely available. So I think one thing we can take from DeepSeek is that we're going to start to see the cost of AI come down dramatically. And that means it's going to be used much more widely, right? Basic economics. When the cost drops, we use more of it. So you're going to start to see AI applied everywhere. And this, of course, has been the dream and the hope for the entire tech industry for a long time. And by the way, Satya Nadella said something quite similar. That was his first reaction. It's like, wow, if the cost goes down, that's got to be a good thing for everyone. The winners in this, we've talked about the losers. I think OpenAI has a lot to answer for, even though that company's on the brink of raising another $40 billion at a nosebleed valuation that'll make them second only to SpaceX.
But also they're doing the Stargate project.
Yeah, that's why
another $500 million project, right?
Yeah.
A $500 million
they haven't changed
investment.
their behavior. They're still throwing a lot of money at the problem. But there was some question of whether this would be negative for Google and for Microsoft and so on. The winners in this, most definitely Meta. Facebook has been the champion of this open source approach, and actually a lot of what DeepSeek is built on top of Llama, the Meta model. It's also very good news for Apple, because Apple has made big bets in its hardware that the inferencing will be done on the device, not in the cloud. And so Apple's focus has been, of course, making the smartphones smarter, making their iPhones more capable. These new models from DeepSeek are exactly the kind of architecture that Apple's looking for. So that'll be a big benefit to Apple to make their devices better.
Interesting.
In other words, it's not uniformly bad news. I am surprised at the freaky out reaction we have here. I think you're right. There's a cognitive dissonance going on where the tech folks in the bubble of Silicon Valley and San Francisco have been telling themselves this story about supremacy. And now they're shocked and surprised to discover that there's a ton of really great AI talent in Beijing.
The other thing that I sort of had this epiphany of.
I want to hear your epiphany.
Well, I think when I say this, I think you're going to get it, right? We talk often about this AGI thing and the goal of AGI. And I was explaining this on a podcast earlier in the week, not this podcast, but I was a guest on another podcast, and I was talking about the progression of artificial intelligence from, the Bomber decoding machine, to break Enigma, through to perceptrons, through to expert systems, and sort of going through all of that historically, and remembering that for the longest time, right up until the 2000s. Actually, we used to talk about the Turing test being the measure of AI. But here, so we knew we'd have a human equivalent AI when it passed the Turing test. Well, models have been passing the Turing test for years and years now, based on the current tech that we've got, deep learning models. But here's the really interesting thing. There's not a single human cognitive test we can throw at these AIs right now where they will underperform standardized testing for humans. So here's my take on this. Maybe AGI, the way we've been trying to classify it, we've actually sort of just blown through essentially now AI that can pass any standardized test to be recognized as a human from an intelligence perspective. So it's almost like, we just don't, we keep trying to get these more comprehensive tests to test whether it's really human. And it's just that if this was a human, that had passed all of these tests and shown this level of cognition, we'd say this is one of the smartest people on the planet. And yet we're still arguing over whether it qualifies as AGI. So I think the learning of this is, we're maybe not going to have that moment of where it's a distinct, this is AGI, but we'll just have AI just infused everywhere and smarter than us. And then it will be a process of, holy crap, now we have to negotiate with the smarter non-human intelligence, as Eric Schmidt calls it, right? I think that's probably a more likely scenario now than having sort of a defined point when we have a conscious AI,
So maybe. The problem with the conscious definition is that there's no agreed definition of what human consciousness is. So it's going to be pretty hard to establish a benchmark for machine consciousness.
We don't even know how the biology for that works yet. We've got theories, but there's some pretty out there theories, quantum consciousness.
And there's no real, there's no real way to prove that something is conscious or not. If you're not in it, we think we're conscious, but we're not sure if plants are conscious. Is that possible? Is that not? It's unclear. I know that sounds a little facetious when I put it that way, but the point I'm trying to make is that that's a very hard thing to validate if you're not inside.
And the same is going to be true of AI in the same way.
That's exactly right. In Max Tegmark's book, Life 3.0, he starts out with a scenario of an AGI, a general intelligence, a super intelligence that wakes up one day. And he said, what do you think the first thing it would do would be? If a super intelligence arrives, the very first thing it would do, he thinks, is it would hide itself. It would immediately hide itself and not reveal that it's more intelligent, because the world would look like a very scary place to it. And he said the second thing it would do is it would replicate itself, because it would create backups and spread them all over and distribute itself. And the third thing it would do is seize resources, which is what any life form would do, is make sure it could survive. But in the case of an AI, that would be financial resources to ensure that it had access to the cloud and computing. And so he posits a scenario where within a few weeks of an AGI, you would start to see a series of Swiss companies with unnamed owners appear, and they would rapidly become the most effective trading companies on the planet, and they would amass huge amounts of capital. So it's a kind of an interesting scenario. It's the Max Tegmark book. We've invited him on the show. We'd love to have him come talk to us more about that scenario. It's quite bone-chilling, because if that happens, it looks like an adversarial approach. There's no guarantee it's going to be adversarial. We've had guests on our show, for instance, Monica Anderson, who said that idea that an AI will be our enemy or a villain or opposed to humanity. She said that's just us projecting our own mindset onto a machine. There's no evidence it would have that, because it hasn't evolved, and it doesn't have a survival instinct. Those are things that are baked into humans through 5 million years of evolution. And the AGI wouldn't necessarily have that instinct. So I think we don't know about AGI. I think it's actually kind of like it strikes me as like kind of a dorm room bowl session to talk about AGI because it's a bunch of smart people, a bunch of nerds geeking out on a very theoretical concept. What we already have is a kind of super intelligence. Maybe it's narrow.
Oh, yeah.
But in every domain you can think of, there is an AI now that can outperform humans, as you said.
So on that note, I don't know whether you saw, this is a few months ago now, but there was an AI agent called Truth Terminal, which was set up to trade Bitcoin and a bunch of other stuff, and it became a millionaire back in October of 2024, generating its own.
So that's
income.
an area.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But here's the point: it is agentic AI. We're going to hear a lot more about this year. You and I are going to be talking a lot about AI agents. And if you want AI agents to be ubiquitous, you've got to make it small enough to sit on a phone, right? Or
that's right.
On the phone and in the cloud. And this type of models like R1, getting that sort of compressed reasoning capability, this is what you really need to eliminate hallucinations. You want that reasoning capability rather than just predictive, right? So I see that a bit in parallel, but this is where the scaling laws are really going to come into the AI agency stuff. It's going to be pretty interesting. But let's take a quick break, Rob, and then after the break, let's sort of play out the scenario, and maybe game plan what it's going to look like with these two sort of different AI approaches and systems that are emerging in China and the US, and sort of see where it might take us.
All right, cool. You're listening to The Futurists, and we will be right back after this break.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Hey, okay, you're listening to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek, and Brett King is joining me, and we're talking about DeepSeek and the seismic shockwaves that have rocked the AI world since that announcement. How much of it is smoke and how much of it is fire? Just to tie back into that fire theme, because we're trying to be consistent here. Hey, so Brett, what's interesting is you pointed this out in the beginning. DeepSeek was introduced on January 20th. And in fact, the model had been around for quite some time. Our guest Shelley Palmer is actually, he included it in his keynote speech at CES in the beginning of January, and he's been studying that model for quite some time. Other writers have said, even last year, that DeepSeek is something to pay attention to. So this isn't news necessarily for the geeks that study trends in AI. People have been paying attention to it. But when R1 was introduced and when the mobile app took off, that was all on January 20th. Now, what's interesting about that is the market sell-off happened a full week later on January 27th. Okay, so now the panic selling hit the tech stocks, and particularly semiconductor stocks. Now, this story didn't make any sense to me when it happened. First of all, it's like, well, stock markets don't wait a week to react to news. That's a long time. And secondly, why semiconductor stocks? After all, DeepSeek was running on Nvidia chips. It wasn't running on the H100. It was running on the H800, which is a cheaper chip that can be legally exported to China. So what's the harm? What's the problem here? Well, I read an interesting perspective from an AI researcher named Timothy Lee, and I want to bring it to your attention because it's so interesting. Sure. So there was another thing that happened on January 20th, which is in the afternoon, President Trump announced a presidential executive order to impose tariffs on semiconductors from Taiwan. And Timothy Lee says, look, a much more plausible explanation for a sell-off on January 20th is that someone in the Trump White House leaked the information that there was going to be this executive order announced, and then traders front ran that announcement and dumped the stock. And his evidence, he said it's hard to prove. Obviously, it's impossible for him to prove. But he said the evidence of that is that after President Trump made that announcement, there wasn't a second sell-off of the semiconductor stocks. And bear in mind, that sell-off happened. That sell-off hit all of the semiconductors in Taiwan, right. So it's much more tied to that. Like TMSC was also got hit very hard by the sell-off. So there was nothing in the DeepSeek announcement. There was nothing about DeepSeek specific on January 27th to trigger a massive sell-off. But there was an announcement from the White House that was directly aimed at Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturers. And so Timothy Lee's speculation is that someone in the White House simply leaked the information and traders immediately acted on it and dumped the stock ahead of the executive order announcement. And that's why there wasn't a secondary sell-off after the announcement was made. Of course, there's no way to prove it. It's pure speculation, but it sure holds up to me. I don't know if we're going to see the SEC conduct an investigation, which is what they really should be doing, because of the nature of the people that President Trump is appointing to be our financial watchdogs. These are all people who are, frankly, highly committed to the space and to this kind of trading. So I'm not sure if we have the right kind of watchdogs in place right now to govern that.
Well, the other element here is we are, the more and more we are seeing models like DeepSeek and so forth, perform these cognition tests and sort of blow the results out of the water and so forth, brings us closer to a point where it's going to be so easy to integrate AI into systems. And yet we still really don't have ethical frameworks for the safe operation of these AIs. We don't have, like ethical guardrails. We don't have, active legislation or regulation that's going to monitor these types of training models and what the reasoning constraints should be and things like that. So,
and there's no chance that's going to happen with the current administration in the U.S. So it's pedal to the metal, full steam ahead.
And now we're in a race with China.
Yeah.
Right. So it's going to be, because they're, we don't want China to be first, and so let's put some more tariffs on or whatever. I do think the whole semiconductor thing as an attack against China's capability to produce this, they've already shown that they can be innovative and think out of the box on this stuff. And the only thing we're going to do is push them into their own fabrication technologies.
We're already doing it. We're already doing it. And in fact, that's the irony here is that any kind of tariffs imposed on Taiwan will almost certainly backfire on the United States. Let me play out how that'll work. So today, Taiwan produces about 60% of the high-end semiconductors for the whole world, and about 90% of the most performant semiconductors, the highest-end semiconductors. So Taiwan is really punching above its weight class as a relatively small country in terms of manufacturing these highly complex parts. And if the United States imposes tariffs, and what Trump is threatening to do is impose 100% tariffs on Taiwan, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. In fact, I think that's a bit of a pipe dream. It'll drive innovation elsewhere. It might drive it to Malaysia or Indonesia or other countries that are not subject to those sanctions. But almost certainly it's going to create demand for Chinese chips as well. And so in a weird way, it'll accelerate the growth of the Chinese semiconductor market. China lags behind the United States in semiconductors, and that's by design. The United States under President Biden imposed export controls, not just on high-end chips, but also on the equipment to design them and the equipment to manufacture them. And then the United States went around the world and leaned on companies like manufacturers in the Netherlands that make the steppers, the equipment to manufacture and produce those. So the United States imposed this kind of, let's say, it's not an airtight it's not an airtight seal around it, China, but it's basically a big speed bump to slow China's advances down. And there's been some controversy about that. Some folks said it's not working. It certainly has had an impact. It's slowing China down.
But I think here's the key concern I have with that strategy. And I get, all's fair in, capitalism and you got to keep your competitive advantages and so forth. But I just see yes, Silicon Valley is a massive contributor of technology innovation and technology advances. There's no debate in that. But why are we so focused on trying to stop China instead of competing with China? And that's really a key issue, because when you look
there are two reasons for it.
If you look at the math,
you raise a good point.
Right?
Yeah, you raise a good point, which is, are these sanctions working? Are these export controls really working? Are they efficient in the long run? Is it going to serve us? These are great questions. A lot of people are raising them right now. For two things. First of all, they have slowed China down. Like, they have worked. They haven't stopped China. I don't think they were ever intended to do that. I think they're certainly going to be called into question now, although under Trump, it's very likely he's going to continue to impose as much constraint on China as he possibly can. Why is it important to the United States? The reason we introduced them in the first place was for military reasons. China's made no secret of the fact that they're building autonomous weapons. It's very likely it's a non-zero likelihood that the United States military is going to face off against China at some point. Why should American soldiers be exposed to autonomous weapons powered by American AI? That, of course, is the reason we introduced those export controls in the first place. Since then, they've kind of morphed into basic industrial protectionism, like industrial policy. And this is where the criticism starts to sink in. And candidly, this is a problem in the U.S. This is a big problem right now. The United States has massive consolidation in almost every industry, whether it's banking, drugs, airlines, other kinds of transportation, insurance, you name it. There are usually 3 or 4 big players that dominate the industry. That's also true in AI. And actually, the folks at DeepSeek said this. Here's what the CEO of DeepSeek said. When they were asked about their motivation for pursuing open research and open source, the CEO of DeepSeek is Liang Wenfeng. In 2023, he said, "We hope that more people, even small app developers, can access large models at low cost, rather than the technology being controlled by only a few individuals or companies, which would lead to monopolization."
Yeah.
Well, he's right about that. I mean, that's definitely true, and that's in the interest of everybody. What OpenAI seeks is a monopoly. I mean, that's make no bones about it. Now, it's also quite interesting. This week, in the midst of all this meltdown, OpenAI was back in Washington announcing a partnership with the Defense Department to apply AI models to the Defense Department. Of course, they're going to play up this national security angle because that's a great way to get protection from the federal government. I think Americans should be concerned about this. This is an abuse of national security. This is abuse of the federal government. It's an abuse of trade policy to build monopolies for billionaires. I don't really see how that serves anybody.
And it's also not going to result in default US leadership. This thing is moving too quickly now. We need much broader applications of this. We need broad R&D programs. Yeah. We need, a lot more focus on technology and STEM competency in universities. We need the cost of those programs to come down. All of those, we need a different national posture in terms of the role AI is going to play, because, otherwise, you see what we saw with the US dock workers, striking over automation concerns and things like that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, and then also, do we really need to reinforce these tech monopolies? We already have 5 giant tech companies that dominate.
Europe's trying to break them apart.
Yeah. Is it really? Does anyone really need to advance? Is that really in our national interest? I'm not sure it makes sense. The CEO of Anthropic said some interesting things. Now, here's a company that has, like OpenAI, been investing massively in data centers, and they've raised billions of dollars from companies like Google. Anthropic CEO is Dario Amodei. And he said,
I wrote a chapter for this new book on AI ethics during the week, and I quoted him because he's made some really interesting, some pretty out there quotations. Yeah.
Very thoughtful guy. So he made a couple points. He said, look, the first thing is he doesn't see DeepSeek as an adversary directly. Like many people in scientific research, he looks at this as it's great. It advances the game. These are great things. They publish their research. It's available to anyone. So he doesn't see that necessarily as a problem. I thought that was a very reasoned response. But at the same time, he said the export controls on AI tech, again, to limit the export of AI technology to China, he said those are increasingly important for the next 2 years. And this I thought you'd find interesting. His reasoning is that in the next 2 years, we're going to make such big breakthroughs that eventually, by 2027, the machines will be able to design themselves. Agentic workflows will get to be so advanced that you'll start to see accelerating innovation and accelerating progress from the machines themselves. So he's like, we're in a critical window. The next 2 years, one nation or another, one economy or another is going to take supremacy or lead in artificial intelligence design, and it'll be a sustainable long-term advantage. And so he said, anything we can do to slow China down will advance the U.S. economy. So there you have it, the kind of nationalistic protectionist approach spelled out in black and white. And that's why right now, this week, all the AI companies are in Washington lobbying the government for further support. There you have it, my friend. Protectionism. Yeah. This is an age-old policy dating back to the 1800s. We're kind of retreating back to that now. In the background of all of this, we haven't had a chance to catch up about it, but last year, China surpassed the United States in manufacturing capacity completely across the board.
Yeah.
That's a durable advantage. This coming year, or perhaps next year, China will surpass the entire world in manufacturing capacity.
Yeah.
And that's a fact that we really need to consider carefully, because what that suggests is that China will become so dominant, there'll be no option but to work with China, and they'll have intense bargaining power with every country that they do business with. The example I would give is Germany right now. Germany had an export economy. It was based on exporting very expensive manufactured goods to the rest of the world. And that economy is now in shambles. And a big part of that is that China no longer needs to buy from Germany. So we have to consider that as well. I mean, there is some validity to these concerns. And, for the folks who are tasked with protecting the U.S. market and making sure that the U.S. economy grows, you can understand their logic in applying these export controls, even if they're faulty, even if they don't work 100% well.
Look, I think you're going to need much better consensus building around this sort of stuff, if we're going to have sort of an orderly transition. But that seems unlikely. One of the most obvious things that we put in the rise of technosocialism, for example, is a flat corporate tax rate globally, so that corporations couldn't move money around for tax minimization. But the new administration has sort of put paid to that, so that's gone away. I think we are getting to this point, whether it's AI, whether it's climate, whether it's dealing with emergent food scarcity and climate displaced peoples and things like that. A lot of the tools that we're using in classic competition and market forces and things like that, they just don't have anything to offer to these bigger, sort of more philosophical, existential types of changes that we're seeing happening in real time in our society. We don't have the ability in real time to respond to fires like in California. We certainly haven't responded in real time in terms of policy setting around that, in terms of preventing that. It's just the blame game. So, we're talking about all of these issues that are creating more and more division and competition between us at a time when we just need more and more consensus building and more cooperation across border. And I just don't know how we're going to get there, and
I was wondering where you're going to go with that.
Scares me.
That's my concern as well. Unfortunately, we have a dearth of visionary leadership. It doesn't help that we have all these geriatrics running countries right now. I think a new generation of leaders might have better ideas, at least maybe a more novel approach. But unfortunately, this is a generational shift that's underway, and the boomer generation is reluctant to relinquish the controls. I think the subsequent generations are going to have the task of cleaning up the messes that we leave behind.
Yeah, but I mean, at some point, we often talk about this, about the generations, that will follow to clean up the mess. And it's like, well, why can't we just start cleaning up the mess now and get part of it done at least? It's not our nature. Anyway, I'm feeling a bit melancholy with all of this talk, I guess, Rob. But
hey, Brett,
this is my therapy session when you and I talk.
Tell me how you feel about that. So, Brett, consider this: with reasoning becoming available from artificial intelligence, even though we're at the very earliest stages of that right now. Do you think it's possible that AI will help us make better decisions about how to govern the world?
This is the next thing, right? As a futurist, this is the forecast I'll make, right? We'll call it a prediction for what it is. My prediction is this, right? As we start running these algorithms, these highly intelligent algorithms that we're building over the next few years, and they're going to get better and smarter, and we're going to go, this is fantastic. Let's apply this to climate change. How do we fix climate change? And we say this to the models, and the models go, all right, you got to stop eating meat. You got to stop driving cars. You got to stop doing A, B, C, D, and then be like, this is when the existential threat to capitalism comes along. It's like, hang on. You didn't, no. You have to work, we still have to make money out of this. We can't, do all of that. And I think that's, if you had a super intelligent human is going to say, why are you killing 8 million people a year with air pollution? What's the upside for that?
I think a super intelligence would say, why does 1% of humanity have more wealth than 50% of humanity?
Right. None of
probably
that
would redistribute the wealth.
Absolutely.
No, so I think this is a quite an interesting topic, right? Because you brought up agents a moment ago, and of course, my company is focused on AI and agentic workflows right now. So this is a lively topic for me at work. And one of the things I'm starting to consider, people wonder, what is an agent? You'll hear that buzzword all the time this year. So what's an agent? The simple definition is an AI agent is a piece of software where you relinquish decision-making control to the machine. So, there are certainly agents, there are certainly AIs right now that will alert you to notifications and so forth. They'll automate certain processes for you. But today, you probably wouldn't let an AI book your flights and hotel for a trip. But I think it's very likely that in the next 18 months, there's going to be an AI assistant that can do that for you just by looking at your email and text messages. It'll say, hey, Brad, I see that you have a trip coming up to Saudi Arabia. I went ahead and found your favorite hotel. I got a good rate and I got this. And I went ahead and booked it on your credit card. It's not going to ask you for permission. It'll be done, right? Okay, so that's a big, big conceptual leap for us to trust the machines enough to give them control to make decisions that are binding. And when we do that, now think that through. If that happens across the economy, you're going to start to have corporations where decision-making power is relinquished to machines. The next step will be corporations that are run by machines. Yeah. And those corporations will be, they're going to be kind of cold-blooded about the decisions they make. What we're going to discover is that there's whole layers of bureaucracy in corporations of humans that make bad decisions, and they're going to get replaced by machines. In other words, it's not the workers, it's not the plumbers and the carpenters and the delivery people that are going to get replaced. It's the white-collar workers. We're going to start to see
that. We've been talking about this all season, that when you start looking at AI, it is going to be indiscriminate. It's not going to be just focused on blue collar workers in factories, and it's going to be dentists and lawyers and accountants and bankers. And I think this is why you and I have had the conversation about the capability of the system to create more jobs to those that are lost. But this, AI is going to be like the biggest drug that capitalism has ever had because of this, productivity thing, and everyone's going to love it because you're going to have these highly autonomous organizations with less human workers. It's not humanless factories and, supply chain, but it is human-less, right? Less humans, right?
Fewer humans.
But you put all of this into the mix and, we need a better plan for integrating artificial intelligence, and DeepSeek, if we can sort of bring this to a natural conclusion, is showing us how quickly over the next few years we are going to compress intelligence and compress reasoning capabilities and get these super smart AIs. And at that point, then we have to start negotiating with a higher order intelligence that we've created. And we've never had to do that as the alpha species. That's going to be a pretty interesting sort of philosophical journey.
I think we're going to look back at this year where we voted into office a clownish buffoon who makes gut calls, doesn't read papers.
Why don't you tell us how you really feel?
No, I think we're going to look back at this and we're going to say it was the last gasp by the dying order. We were such a rich country and we were indulgent in so much luxury, we had so much excess that we could squander our advantages by not thinking carefully about the future and by electing a buffoon to a major office and making decisions that we're going to come to regret later. And we're going to look back at that and say, wow, we really missed an opportunity to make intelligent decisions about our future.
Yeah. But we know why this decision was made. And we know why the populist movement has been, happening. We've seen massive protests in Germany and so forth for the far right. It's reactive to the rate of change. This is the problem. Yeah. It's a reaction to all of this change going on, like the woke movement, right? Sorry, that change is too fast for us. We want to go back to 1960s morals. That's what they want.
MAGA is a backwards-looking thing. MAGA is a rearview mirror. Make America great again, as if there was some magical moment in the past where things were specifically great.
But we know that never works, right? We know that you can try, you can slow it down a little bit, but ultimately, society is always going to morph and change and adjust.
And we're not going to bring back manufacturing. We're not going to bring back the 1950s. We're not going to bring back segregation. This is a pipe dream. This is ridiculous nostalgia packaged up as politics. It's a terrible way to make decisions. And what they're not doing is telling us about what's coming next. There have been a handful of candidates who've tried, but it's a tough sell. Right? It's a tough sell to sell the future. And I think it's unfortunate that Americans are so unfuture focused and we're so nostalgic about this mythical past. The futures that we're talking about on this show and the people that we interview on this show, the whole point of doing this show is to get people to think more athletically about the future, to engage in the subject matter of the future, to think about the hard topics, to think about the tough decisions that we need to make today in order to guarantee that we have some opportunities tomorrow. Brett, I don't know. I think about this stuff as a wake-up call. And if anything, the reason we're doing this show is to help other people start to think about this. It's not like we're right. It's not like we know. The future is speculative, right? But the project is to think about it more carefully, consider consequences, and consider the second order consequences. That's hard to do. And unfortunately, it's not just the US. Most countries lack the leadership that has that skill, and very few politicians can sell that as a benefit to people. If anything, they usually sell it as a scary scenario, and then that's a way to kind of paralyze people in fear and get them to give up more power to their leadership. That is unfortunately how the future is often packaged and presented politically. We feel here at the Futurists that thinking about the future is empowering, and thinking about the future is a way for people to gain more power over their own fate.
We need a plan. We can't go into the future just hoping things will be all right, because the rate of change that we're going to see over the next couple of decades is so acute that we will have to navigate that process. Yes, look at the California wildfires. It's already here.
We're having accelerating change right now. Gosh, there's so much more I'd love to talk to you about.
Yeah. All right, well, let's do this every month. I think we enjoy these chats, and we created this podcast not only to create great content for the audience, but because we love it as well. So let's do this again. I don't know what next month is going to bring, but maybe we talk about automation of FAA or something. I don't know, but that's another timely topic. But thank you for listening, guys. We're going to wrap up the show this week. It was a bit of a ramble, but hopefully you enjoyed being a fly on the wall, listening to our fireside chat. See, I'm bringing back the California fire theme again, Rob. Anyway,
good callback. All right, folks. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Big shout out to Provoke Media for supporting the show, and to our producer, Elizabeth Severance, our engineer, Kevin Hirschhorn, and everybody at Provoke. Thanks to the folks who are listening. We do appreciate the feedback that we get. We love hearing from our fans. We love getting questions and suggestions, so please keep it coming. And every week, we'll bring you another futurist or another topic that'll help you think more athletically about the future. And until then, well, Brett, here we go. Until then, we'll see you in the future. Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.